Welcome to another episode of In a Nutshell. Food for Thought is a documentary that explores the global vegan movement and the reasons behind it. It features interviews with experts, advocates to veganism, and people who have transitioned to a plant-based diet with the aim of inspiring people to consider a plant-based lifestyle. So we are absolutely delighted to be able to chat with the two people behind the film, the directors, Dan Richardson and Giles Alderson. So welcome to The Nutshell.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you guys. Hello, Claire. Hello, Daisy.
We'll kick off then by asking you a little bit about how the film came about and to say to you, you know, these films on veganism, it is true, isn't it, that they tend to be more a labour of love rather than a money-making box office hit. So can you tell us how you both came to find yourself working on this project?
I think it's one of those things for me and Dan. I've been filmmakers, Dan's an actor, I've been directing movies for a while, that we wanted to make something that felt like it would make a difference to people, but also something that we were really passionate about because we love doing what we do. However, often they don't have the right message. You know, if it's a horror movie or if it's an action thriller, the message is, you know, redemption or trying to stay alive. And again, okay, this might be redemption, trying to stay alive with Food for Thought. But at the same time, we were like, well, look, let's do something that actually can make a difference in terms of me and Dan going around interviewing people and talking to people about something that we really passionate about, which is having a plant-based living and not hurting animals at the same time. So that was the original thought behind it. And then Dan came up with an idea.
My original idea, after as Giles says, we kind of talked for many years about we've got to do something and it has to have meaning. I thought, wouldn't it be so quick and easy to just get people to go on a vegan diet for 30 days? To document their journey with video diaries, send them to us, and then they've kind of made the movie for us. And obviously, as you know from seeing the film now, it's much more than that, but that does still form the backbone of it. But really, it's that original idea from which the rest of the film grew. All of the other areas of the film, the ideas in the film, all kind of grew from that initial seed of vegan participants taking part in the challenge, which is still, I think it's a crucial and probably the most relatable part of the film. But that's where it all started, yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. So you wanted to cover these people that were new to veganism on their 30-day journey. But to bolster that, there's obviously all these other angles of plant-based diets and veganism that you cover in the film. I mean, we know if we were filmmakers, it would be really difficult to pick out which areas to cover. So can you tell us more about how you decided what angles of plant-based diets to include in the film?
It's a really great question, and actually it's something me and Dan toyed with for a while. You know, how much nutrition should we get in there? How much someone who health benefits? How much is this food related? We really went through it and really thought about it quite a bit. Certain people didn't want to be in a documentary. Certain people didn't want to talk about it from certain areas. It was also during COVID, a lot of this when we were filming as well. So it was very difficult to try and get people we wanted. We did have a nutritionist from West Ham, ex-Arsenal and England nutritionist who was going to come and talk to us. We had some other footballers who were going to do the interviews as well. And you just get to the point where you go, hey, we've got what we've got. And it's very, like you said, it's really difficult to pick, you know, what you want to do with this. And it was just making those choices. It was like, okay, well, we could go down this route. We could keep going further with the documentary and trying to find another interview. And we were kind of like, well, we really like what we've got. And that's maybe what Food for Thought 2 is, or the next documentary we make, is we push different angles, because there's so many different angles that we haven't explored in the documentary. There's so much we have explored, but there was more. And we were like, okay. So yes, that's one of the main reasons.
Just to sort of go into that a bit more, you mentioned when you're talking to each other in the film that you don't want to preach. And so I presume you put a little bit of thought into how to say things. So can you expand on the how a bit?
Yeah, I mean, that was a really key objective for us from day one. I don't know if you guys are experts in human nature. We're certainly not, but we're all susceptible to it. We're all partaking in that nature. And so we can all relate to it in a big way, in so much as, it's quite simply put, if someone comes and confronts you about something, we're naturally defensive. And because the purpose of this film was to try to make a difference, that's the key objective, is to make a difference. We wanted it and needed it, in fact, to be relatable. That was probably priority number one, to be relatable. If you don't go the route we took, which was to just be as non-judgmental, non-preachy, as you say, and we really hope that comes across in the film, and certainly from early feedback, it seems to have done. You're just going to lose the key audience. We could very easily have made a film that would just essentially be a pat on our own backs, and we know we'd already have the vegan community congratulating us for it. And we also know that if we did that, we'd have changed a grand total of nothing. We'd have changed not one single mind, because they already agreed with us and they were already vegan. And the people that really matter, who we really, really want to see the film and to, just plant that seed in their mind and give them, forgive the pun, some food for thought. We needed them to stick around. We need them to see the first couple of minutes and think, all right, I'll give it another 5. And then to see those 5 minutes and think, well, I'm still not being judged or confronted or yelled at, vilified, all those things. And so that just informed us in everything we did and said. But I think we're lucky as well, because inherently both Giles and I are like that. There are, don't get me wrong, I do feel it. A lot of the time I'm infuriated by what I see, and I wish I could be a bit more direct with people sometimes, but I don't think it would achieve much. And so we're naturally that way anyway. And then what you see in the film is really the organic result of that.
Thinking about the messages that you were getting across there, one of the messages that was particularly interesting for us as the hosts of In a Nutshell is where you have medical evidence to promote plant-based eating. Part of our frustration is there's no shortage of good examples and good evidence, but how do you actually make people take that on in terms of normalizing plant-based diets and getting people to actually sort of use a plant-based diet to address health problems? So what was interesting for me was that there were a couple of points where you started off that thought process with people. So, for example, when you identified your participants, I think you had somebody sort of say, I'll be interested to see the effect it has on my diabetes. But I don't think that bit got followed up. And I would say a similar thing about, you had that wonderful patient story about somebody eating plant-based and feeling that it had really had an effect on them for their cancer. So I just wanted to know, was that a conscious sort of editorial decision, coming back to anything you've said about not preaching or not going on about things too much? How would you think about that now?
I'll tell you, specifically with the chap, Julian, who, as you quite rightly pointed out, he starts his vegan journey by saying, I'm diabetic, so I'm really interested to see what the vegan diet will do to that. Remember that everything that they provided to us was literally a 30-day experiment. So in those 30 days, we wouldn't expect to see any results. And then ironically, and I'll hand over to Giles to talk about Claire in a moment on the other person that you mentioned, but ironically, I very recently reached out to Julian. Giles and I ourselves came to the realization, just as we were about to put the film public, because you then start to think about it in a very different way from that perspective. And I remember saying to Giles a few weeks ago, why don't we ask Julian what the result was? Because we've never found that out. Because after 30 days, you wouldn't know the result. And then beyond that, all we know is he stayed vegan, and we haven't spoken to him since. So I reached out to him quite recently, just before Christmas, in fact, and he was off in responding to telling us he couldn't make the premiere because he was off to Peru traveling. I then reached out again and said, well, wait, before you go, what was the latest on the diabetes? And we've not heard back from him, because he's probably in deepest, darkest Peru. So unfortunately, we don't know. But we're with you on that. We'd love to know. But the great thing is that we get to follow up with that, because our film is on YouTube, and we plan to put a lot more follow-up and a lot more content on YouTube as well. But Giles can perhaps speak about Claire.
Yeah, it was really important to us that we told these stories, but we were also very wary of, because we were so quick to judge and vilify us for what we're putting out there. And we're going to get it anyway. And we've kind of got it a little bit anyway, of people questioning everything. I think just people like to do that, and it's okay. We don't mind. It's fine for us. But I think certainly with Claire and cancer treatment, and with Roy as well, we're very wary of putting facts out. For one, it's not that suddenly everyone goes, oh, by the way, here's my results, and they're very happy to have that shown on camera. But at the same time, a lot of people aren't particularly happy about you doing that. Some people can get really upset with that side of it as well. So we were very wary about what we were saying. We wanted to do it from their perspective, because it's their truth and their honesty at the end of the day. This is what they feel has happened, rather than it being full absolute, here's the fact of this. It's very hard to sort of put that into words. You might find that easier, but we didn't. And we found that very difficult in the film to go, and here's proof, because someone would always just say, well, that's actually not proof. This is this. So we were very careful with how we did that. And we did do it on purpose to not necessarily go too deep into those moments. We understand that that could be slightly surface level, but at the same time, it was also someone's personal journey and personal story. And that's what they believed. And that for us worked for the documentary we were making.
I think that sounds really fair. What I was thinking was actually there's a lot of films, aren't there, that do go into real depth of the health benefits of vegan diets. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about any of them that you particularly admire or that you think really do the job of putting the health benefits across, perhaps something that influenced yourselves.
I wouldn't call it any of them an influence, but I would very readily admit that I admire all of them, at least not because they made a film, and that's a tough thing to do in itself. But The Game Changers covers it briefly when it talks to the two American football players, and it's actually quite a humorous, light-hearted part of the film, but it is the more medically driven part of it where they do the blood tests for the two American footballers, and it's quite a memorable scene. But What the Health is a really easy example. And I admired Kip for that. It was fantastic. Kip Anderson, who's the chap that kind of walks you through it all. And actually, it speaks really loudly to the point Giles was just making as well about Claire, and who was our guest who had said that she had cancer, and her experience. It wasn't just her opinion; it was a fact that her cancer has gone away. And actually, she was at the premiere in January, 6 or 7 years after we interviewed her, and she's still clear. So it's a real thing. She's cancer free, and she didn't seek traditional treatment. She just went plant-based. But if you look at What the Health as a good example of a film that, A, I admire them very much for what they did. It's a great film. B, they presented more fact than anything else. And I can tell you right now that there are numerous websites dedicated to myth-busting everything that What the Health said. You can't do that with Food for Thought, because it's just someone's opinion, someone's journey, someone's reality. Interestingly enough, in What the Health as well, Kip, as you'll recall if you've seen it, he goes into, I think it was the American Cancer Society, which is that very, very memorable scene where he's allowed in, and then they realize why he's there and they escort him out. And all he's there to do is say, as red meat and processed meat can be shown to be a category 1 carcinogenic, which of course is evidence-based, and that's talking about the American Food and Drug Administration. They're the people who categorize it, so there's not much to argue with. And then at the same time, the American Cancer Society had on its suggested meals page of its website a beef dish. And that's what Kip was there to ask. He was there to say, if this is the case, as per the US Food and Drug Administration, how come beef is on the menu for your cancer patients, not just the potential risk, but the patients themselves? Here, eat this. This is a suggested meal. How in the world that's ever supposed to help? And of course, you'll remember he was just escorted out of the building immediately by security. That's where the interview ended. And I guess the point that makes is back to that point I made about human nature. They didn't like that at all. And he had a very, very reasonable set of facts in front of him. It was a very reasonable question. And it actually, ironically, also a question that you would think the world's public would be very grateful to him for asking. But the natural human instinct is to not, if you don't want to believe it, you're going to look for evidence to the contrary. And as I say, there's websites dedicated to doing just that, which is quite extraordinary when you think about it, because all that's designed to do is help. He's not there to try and crush the meat industry or the dairy industry. He's just saying this is actually harmful. And the US Food and Drug Administration agrees. And it has such a level of evidence to suggest that it's carcinogenic, red meat and processed meat, that puts it in the same category as asbestos and nicotine. That's not to suggest that you get the same effect from eating a kilogram of either, but it suggests there's that much evidence to prove that it is carcinogenic. So when there's people willing to dedicate their life, their time, their efforts to countering that argument, we knew really early on to steer clear of it. We actually there's a scene that's not in the film where I actually talked about the pandemic. I talked about some of my views on it. And then I specifically said, that's not a fact, by the way, that's just my opinion. But then we just cut it because we thought we don't need to go into that level of detail. But that's literally what we were allowing to guide us the whole way through for that reason.
I think that's really interesting because I remember the bit though where you do mention the pandemic and you're sort of saying, how did this not have a bigger impact on people's attitude to eating animals? And I had exactly the same thought because, of course, you know, if you're old enough, you remember the BSE crisis, and for a short while, it looked as if people were actually getting the idea then that at least going vegetarian might be a good idea, and it didn't have that impact. So I think, you know, exactly what you're saying about the you know, the challenges to getting those really obvious health messages across. We recognise that it's all that we do at Plant-Based Health Professionals, and our current campaign, which is all about trying to get processed meat, especially and red meat, off menus. You know, it's challenging. Yeah.
It's interesting, by the way, if you look at the American Cancer Society's website now, the only beef, in inverted commas, the only beef dish they have is a plant-based beef dish. They do still have seafood and chicken and turkey, but there's no red meat on there. But so the human nature, right? In the film, they refused to talk to him. They escorted him from the building. But in reality, they probably left it a couple of years so that it didn't seem like it was related. But it's gone from the menu. So there's probably an acknowledgement in there somewhere.
Yeah. The next thing that I wanted to ask you about is really shifting gear a bit, because it's not so much talking about facts, but more about the emotions that are covered in the film. We certainly found a number of parts of the film very powerful, and I was really quite tearful at some of the parts, even though you'd sort of warned us up front, we're not going to show animal suffering. And Dan, you were the one who came forward at that point and sort of identified yourself as someone who had always empathized with animals, and yet you'd had this long period of eating them and not recognizing certain aspects of animal cruelty. And when you've been in that place, it obviously gives you huge emotional information about what might be going on with other people and their decisions when they're exposed to the facts. We're all, I think, familiar with the term cognitive dissonance. Yeah. And I wanted to know sort of how your own experience of being a meat eater for so long actually informed your approach in the film and how you wanted to get some of those messages across.
It's exactly as you described it, and it's exactly what we've talked about in terms of human nature. There I was, a perfect example of it. And I mean it sincerely. I know in my heart I always loved animals. They were always my priority. I've dedicated my life to the betterment of the planet for the sake of animals, and I was eating them until I was 45. And you see a lot of stuff out there. You see there's a lot of memes, if you like, on social media that say you can't love animals and eat them. And I agree now, but I didn't before. And if I'd have seen that before, I'd have felt kind of affronted by that. I'd be like, well, I love animals and I eat them. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a cognitive dissonance thing, and that comes from a level of conditioning that is so deeply ingrained that we don't even know it's happening. It's literally from the moment we're conscious and throughout all of our lives and generationally going back in time. Meat, dairy, the normalization of animal products, not just for food. I mean, try and find something without leather in it. You know, every single car out there, pretty much, even with the cloth interior, has a leather steering wheel cover. We are so dependent on animals. We exploit them so regularly. It's absolutely normalized, and that's what we're fighting against. So it does take some, I certainly don't want to call it courage. It doesn't take courage to walk away from that, but it takes a personal epiphany, an awakening of some kind, contributed to by many things or triggered by one thing, whatever it may be. Something has to happen within you for that to change. So I understand completely, and it did inform the way we made the film, because that's it. We're a walking, talking example of exactly who we're aiming at, is the people they're good people. And if you approach it in a certain way, everyone's different, of course. And that's also, we're respecting the uniqueness of people. Some people need to see the slaughterhouse footage. That's what will change them. And I think fair to say most wouldn't look at the slaughterhouse footage. And therefore our approach, the softly approach, is probably more likely to at least plant a seed, but maybe, who knows, maybe spin them 180 degrees on the fly, which happened at the premiere. It literally happened. We got feedback from a guy saying, I made a decision during the film. I'm not going to eat meat again in my life. And by the way, I'm meeting him in 2 days from now. because he's still vegan and he's loving it, and he wants to talk about making a film, which is wonderful. So yeah, we changed his life during a 90-minute film.
Mm. And it's the same. That cognitive dissonance is just, as Dan said, it's there, and it was within Dan as well, and we can't help it. It's almost like, yeah, I'm saving the rhinos and the elephants, and I wouldn't dare eat a dog, and how dare they eat a dog over there? But yeah, here I am. Let's go to KFC afterwards, and it's kind of a little bit. It's so normalized and so normal to do. It's like, oh yeah, but that's chicken. That's all right, or that's pig. That's all right, and it's like, no. And often we call it something else as well. Cow isn't called, oh, I'm going to eat a cow. It's called beef sandwich, or you've got your pig with your ham sandwich. So it's even called something else to take it away from the fact. I mean, that's not the reason that the French, when they came across, changed all the words and it became popular that way. But it's easier to do it. We don't say, oh, I'm going to have some pig tonight. And that's what's really interesting. I think that's changing our mindsets, and it's really difficult to get into that. For me, it was seeing the footage. As soon as I saw the footage, that was really the moment I went, oh gosh, I can't keep doing this. And the hardest bit for me was the sweets and having gelatin in them. I still can't believe that sweets have gelatin. You're like, but why? It makes no sense. It still doesn't make any sense. Why would you need that just to stick them together? Surely we can find something else. If Percy Pigs can do it, then other things can do it too. And that, I think, is really something that the world really needs to get hold of, and more people need to understand it and go, yeah, do you know what? I don't need to cause the suffering. And there's many different routes I feel you can take to veganism, or the not eating animals is one. Is the fact of the cruelty of what happens, but the other one is your health, and then the other one is the environment. And there's lots of different reasons why you could do that, but I think we all need to be aware of it. And it's definitely not taught enough, and it's definitely not a thing. Certainly, even when I spoke to my doctor recently about it, he was, they didn't really understand what I needed to do, or they needed to do about it. And it was like, oh, well, maybe you're not eating well enough. Maybe that's the issue why you've got, a mark on your arm. Like, no, it's really not. And I think that just takes a long time to get the change. And at the moment, the change isn't happening as fast as we'd like, or as fast as it needs to, but it's great people like yourselves who are trying to make that change. And that's what's wonderful about it, is you do find like-minded people, and the tough approach doesn't work, and it has to be the softer approach does seem to work. It makes a difference.
Coming away from making films, I know that in the film itself, and this might just be a part of a device of the film, but Giles, you credit yourself with helping Dan to see the connections. Is that right? And you did that without showing things like slaughterhouse footage, because we come on to that in the film. Do you have any personal successes other than the one mentioned, either of you, in sort of what you've learned from the softly approach? Are you persuasive on a one-to-one basis, or outside of using the film?
Yeah, I think, for the past however many years I've been vegan now, 9, 10, and sure down with like 7 or 8, I think 9 maybe. Yeah, every single time before we had the documentary out, we were still talking to people about it. And what I found, and Dan, I'm sure you're the same, is because I try not to mention it, but when they, we're ordering food or we're somewhere and they go, oh, you're plant-based. Right, okay, you've brought it up now. They go, well, I couldn't possibly do it because I'm like, okay, well, I'm not, okay, now I need to tell you. But if they don't bring it up, I tend not to, because it's like no one wants that. No one wants someone preaching at them, whatever it is. So yeah, for me, it's always been a case of, if you want to know this, I will tell you. If you really want to know, I'll go deeper, and then let's have a conversation. And Dan's great at it too. He's done it for so long. But yeah, the conversation happened between me and Dan. We were we were having a lunch together, and he was going, literally, as we say in the documentary, that actually happened. And I went, no, mate, you're not. You've got, and it was that, I think that night you did call me, but it's quite interesting how something can just click and it can change. And I feel you were the same, Dan, and I feel it's the same for
absolutely. You. And I mean, there's another great example of the softly approach, because Giles wasn't vilifying me when he said that. He was still my buddy. He wasn't about to walk out the door if I had said I was not quite ready to go vegan. And that's what tipped me. That's what tipped me over the edge, for sure. It was just like, it suddenly just dawned on me that it didn't make any sense not to be. And it's such a strange phenomenon as well when you realize that, because something that had always made sense for my entire life up until that point suddenly made zero sense. And all I wondered at that point was, how did I not see this before? And it's it's never, I've never looked back. And I have to say, I also do think that one of the most powerful, and I don't wish to sound too fluffy when I say this, but I think one of the most powerful things we can do as vegans is, we keep on talking about how normalized exploitation and cruelty is. We're lucky that veganism has gone from being marginalized. I wouldn't call it mainstream yet. It's certainly more mainstream than it was, but it's being normalized. And it's being normalized by people like us, all of us, I mean, by living that and not preaching it, not judging people for not living the same way we do, not making the same choices we do. But I bet each of us has people who have changed their lifestyle, or who've certainly started thinking about changing their lifestyle simply by observing the life that we live. And it's that whole fluffy thing of be the change you want to see in the world. I think that's one of the most powerful ways we can make a difference. Luckily, a couple of times, or maybe half a dozen times, people have said to me, I've made this, even the chap at the premiere that I mentioned, but others too over the years who've said, actually, I had a certain image in my mind of vegans as a stigma attached to it, but I've realized that actually that's not the case, and you've demonstrated that, and I've made some changes. Sometimes they'll tell you quite secretly because of the stigma that's still attached to it, and there's that sort of fear of being different, which is a huge problem in society. It really helps if you don't mind, marching to the beat of your own drum, which pretty much anyone vegan probably doesn't mind. Anyone who does tell you, you can probably guarantee that there's another 10 who won't tell you, but they've also made the same change. I think that's a fair assumption that it's not just the people who've said to us, oh, hey, I've made a change because of what you've posted on social media over the years, or because of what we talked about the other day. There'll be other people doing it very quietly, and I understand that as well. It's probably one of the most difficult things in society is if you're doing something different, if you're stepping away from the crowd. How nice is it to not have any pressure, to not have anyone ridicule you or mock you or question you or confront you about it? The simplest way to achieve that is just don't tell anyone. Just chill, get on with it, do it. And I bet there's lots of people doing that because of everyone on this call.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm finding this discussion really fascinating because me and Claire have had these chats a lot about what is it that suddenly takes a person into exactly what you said, Dan, where suddenly you think, well, how did I ever think that was okay and continue to do? For me, it was like blinkers being removed off glasses or, in front of my eyes, and just I can see clearly now. That's how I felt when I made the transition. As a health podcast, we particularly enjoyed the parts of your film that did follow the journeys of your participants, even though, as Claire mentioned, they weren't all health related. But as GPs, we love, individual personal stories and getting to know our patients and things like that. So actually hearing those journeys was one of the best bits of the film for me. And I just want to say, actually, thank you for making the film. It was brilliant. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. How did you pick those participants? Were they sort of self-selected? How did that process look like?
We put a shout out, to be honest. We were doing some, Dan's always been very active on the socials anyway. So we've Born Free, etc., and all the other, the places that he is associated with. So we already had a kind of a platform where we could say, hey, by the way, does anyone want to come to this event? Or we're doing a talk here. And this was a case of, hey, we're making a documentary. Does anyone fancy going plant-based for 30 days? And then we spread it a bit further as well, and far and wide, and we shared it on various places. And we got a lot of people saying yes, a lot. It was at the time that it was really popular as well. It became quite mainstream. People would, even Piers Morgan was debating it and whatever. And it just became, this could be, do you know what? To do it for a documentary, I think I'll do this. And we got a lot of people saying yes. Out of those people who said yes, we probably got a third who actually did it. And we probably got well over a third who finished. So 2/3 who finished it. And that doesn't mean they didn't actually finish being vegan for 30 days. It just means they didn't film themselves, which for me and Dan, it's brilliant. They did plant-based for that amount of time. But if we don't have a record of it, we can't put it in a documentary. We can't just say, oh, by the way, there was 10 others or 100 others who did this, but we haven't got any proof of that. So we could only use people who actually videoed and done regular diary. And some people are great at that. It's not easy to put yourself in front of your own camera and talk about what you ate that day or do something. So we tried to pick a various array of eclectic mix of people from different backgrounds and different ages. But again, it's not that easy. You kind of also, great. Thank you all for doing it. Great. Send all your videos in. And every day we sent them updates, we sent them feedback, we sent them what they should eat, we sent them health scores, we sent them as much as we could to help them on their way. We got information from the Vegan Society and also, where else, Dan? Veganuary as well. So we got all this information. So we'd send them every day. How are you getting on? Here's some help. Here's some more advice. This is what you're probably going through. This is how we felt too. So we did that every day. So to help them and support them on the way, and also to encourage them to keep doing it and to keep videoing as well. Please video this. Don't just do it, please video. So yeah, we did it that way, and it really worked well for us. So yes, I agree. The participants are fantastic, really great people, and really, really went for it, some of them, which is lovely.
Yeah. It was really nicely done. But I suppose my question would be, though, do you feel, and without giving too much away, because the listeners who I want you to watch the film, it has obviously got quite a lot of, well, they were quite positive, weren't they, the participants? Let's just leave it at that. But do you think that's because they were self-selected? Do you think that is a true measure of where veganism is right now with the general population?
It probably is, but only in so much as those folks who, as you've quite rightly pointed out, they're self-selected. In other words, we put a call out saying, hey, listen, this is what we're looking for, and they volunteered for it. So for whatever reason, maybe they wanted to be on TV, and maybe they wanted to try veganism anyway. And you can see from the different participants we have, some of them are very much more receptive to or susceptible to the lifestyle. For some people, it just clicks. You can see them just easing into it, and you're like, how have you not been a vegan all along? And other people, you think this is not going to end well.
Yeah.
As you say, it ends positively. And I do think that with obvious exceptions, because I'm not going to pretend that there aren't people out there who try the vegan diet and don't like it, perhaps because they don't have the guidance, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the support, perhaps because they, your circle of friends and family is going to make an enormous difference. Because, and again, based on how susceptible you are to that peer pressure, to that ridicule, I've experienced this in my life in different areas. So for about 13 years ago, I stopped drinking alcohol, not because of anything other than the fact that I just wasn't very good at it. I didn't like it. I didn't get much from it. The best way I've ever heard it described, in fact, is it took away much more than it gave me. So I just stopped drinking. And unfortunately, at that point, I was already about 40. And so at that age, it's not like you're going to have your mates I wasn't really socializing at the pub very often anyway. But if I was, it's not like they're at the age where they're going to go, oh, no, I'm not ordering that for you. You can order it yourself. And that kind of silly peer pressure that you probably would get if you were 18 to 25. But I really do think that those sorts of people around you and your resilience to it, if you do get that ridicule, if you do get confronted about it, people are susceptible to that. And if you and I suspect a lot of people who drop out of vegan lifestyle do so because of that, not because vegan lifestyle didn't suit them or that they don't believe in it. And that's a sad reality of society, and especially support groups. If it's because we hear it about people whose families don't support it. I think that's kind of really sad. So who knows why some people don't make it, but I think it's fair to say that the film does represent the fact that most people who try it will probably really, really be pleasantly surprised, as they all were. And it's also probably safe to say that the majority won't. They're not going to say this just flat out hasn't worked for me. I'm gonna turn my back on it. I think they'll probably stick with it to a lesser or greater extent. So in that way, yeah, I think it does probably represent the wider population.
Yeah. Well, it's very hopeful, and more broadly than just the participants, I think, as well as a film. Is that how you see society currently? Do you feel there is a shift, or is it still, like you say, people being put off by family members, or how do you see the transition, I guess, not even since you started the film, but maybe from when you first went vegan?
Yeah, I think there has been a huge shift. Like I said, in sort of 2019, 2020, I think it was a real big time. Supermarkets were suddenly flooding with vegan products. It became very mainstream, as mainstream as it can be, but it was still very vilified. It was the first joke you'd see everywhere as well. Oh, you're vegan, you just told me about it. And it just didn't stop. It was like, so you kind of were in this, great, it's mainstream, but also we were getting, butt of all the jokes and the sort of the insults. And when I first went vegan, or vegetarian, even before that, 12 years ago, I didn't want to tell anyone. I struggled with it in the football groups and stuff because it was vilified. It was, what you doing? It's like not drinking in the pub when you drank the whole time. That insults would come. And certainly when I went vegan, it was like, oh gosh, how am I going to deal with that? So I was really grateful in 2019-20 when it became, oh cool, I'm thinking of doing that, rather than, you're an idiot, what's wrong with you? Oh, I'm going to have a bacon sandwich in front of you. It definitely changed. And it was like, oh, great. And even now, when I tell people, no one judges me or jumps on me. They might argue it and it's, oh, well, I'm doing the meat diet. And you kind of go, really? Have you not read anything? But that's their choice. And it's like, okay, let's have a discussion about it, rather than everyone jumping on that. And it's now much more of a conversation. So I'm very grateful for how things have changed. It's really helped. But I also think there's a long way to go. I think it's maybe regressed a little bit. And I think it's good timing for our documentary to open up that conversation again. And I'm quite disappointed it hasn't grown and become, okay, this is much more normalized. So I think there's a lot of work to do yet. But also I think a lot of people need to think about it themselves, as Dan said, and go, oh, do you know what? I will do meat-free Mondays. And it's much easier to do that. And we're grateful if anyone is doing that, or even just going, I won't have meat this weekend, or no cheese, or it does make a difference. So yes, yeah. I feel it has. I feel that things have changed, but maybe not totally. Not there's more to do, I feel.
Not as quick as we want.
Not as quick as we want. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, obviously we're also working hard to create some change. And I think, we both still work as clinicians, and we work with, very intelligent people day to day who actually read evidence on the health benefits. This is a health podcast. This is quite new for us to be interviewing, yourselves, because normally we have health experts, consultants, dietitians, talking about various benefits of a plant-based diet. Knowing all this, and our colleagues knowing all the literature out there, sometimes we still have a bit of a job convincing them. So I'd be interested actually from your perspective as non-healthcare professionals, giving us a different angle, I suppose. Would you see that we could be doing something slightly different, or doing something, doing more of something in order to help people action the evidence, I suppose?
I think the simple answer to that is that we're dealing with a population of, what are we now, 8 billion people, all of whom, I mean, I'm sure you can categorize them to some extent, but generally speaking, everyone has their own unique viewpoint. So there is no one size fits all, which actually refers to how you approach things yourselves. It refers to how we make a film. All the things that we put into the film, we did because we knew that there's a gap in the genre, because there's the health related stuff like we talked about earlier, such as What the Health, Forks Over Knives kind of touches on it, Cowspiracy touches on it. We've got the Game Changers, you've got the graphic imagery of Earthlings and Dominion and things like that. And we wanted to fill a gap, but more than anything, we didn't just want to fill that gap for commercial reasons, because we knew from the beginning we weren't planning to sell this film, so that wasn't a consideration. We were filling a gap because the gap is filled with people who will be triggered by something different. And we think that our softly approach is that gap, and that we've represented it with the film. Here's the key thing for me, and this is perhaps a fairly bold statement for me to make, but I really believe this is what it comes down to, is that you literally, as individuals, Claire and Daisy, if you do what authentically feels right to you, that's going to be the most powerful thing. If you were to take the advice of someone who says, well, actually what you want to do is just go flexitarian, go that approach, that would not be authentic you, because you're plant-based advocates, and I'm sure you could do it very effectively, but it wouldn't feel authentic to you, and that energy would be carried into your message, whatever that message may be, a conversation with a patient or a film like ours. And I really wholeheartedly believe that authenticity is the most important thing. And unfortunately, because those changes that Giles talks about, they're happening for sure, but it's subtle. Like I said earlier on, we've not gone from being marginalized to being mainstream, but we're certainly more accepted. But those changes are incremental, and they're small, and they're slow. But I just think, what other choice do we have other than to keep being authentic us, doing our thing, flying the flag as best we can in our way? And so I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying, no, I haven't got any advice for you in terms of how you could do things different. But I think the way you're doing things is brilliant, and it will be changing people. In fact, you probably have more influence, arguably, than any film that anyone could make, because the amount of trust individuals put in you, proportionally speaking, obviously, yes, more people would see the film than would see you over the course of in theory, there could be more people. We could end up with millions of viewers, tens of millions of viewers, and you'll never have that many patients. But proportionally, I mean, goodness me, 98% of the people who watch the film don't even subscribe to the channel, never mind subscribe to what we say. Whereas if you're sitting in front of your GP and they say something, I think proportionally you could expect a much higher hit rate.
Yeah.
So I would literally just say, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I wish you guys were my GP, because some of the feedback I've got, or some of the thoughts before I was, plant-based, and I feel like it's not. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel that enough GPs know about this, plant-based living, or certainly it's not taught enough, or there's a smaller amount. So therefore, when I bring it up in the conversation, they're like, oh, rather than it being, yes, I understand that and I'm aware of it. And certainly whether that's taught, I don't know if things have changed now, when practitioners are coming through. But surely this should be the thing that, hang on, this is going to, it's proven to stop heart disease. It's proven to stop cancers. And again, we've got to be very careful about what we say about that, certainly for me and Dan, and maybe you do too. But it's a no-brainer. It's like, well, if that's going to help me feel better and have a healthier, better lifestyle, surely this is the way forward. We're also very aware, and we didn't talk about it in the documentaries, the other side of this, which is the money. And there is a lot of money being pumped into the meat industry, but also into the getting better part of the industry. So if you have had all that meat, you have, right, well, have these supplements, have this will be better for you. And there's a lot of money. We're very, very, very aware of the billions of money that some people are getting from people being ill from what they're eating. So yes, I think it's got a long way to go.
We 100% agree with that, Giles. It's changing, but it's slow. And please, next time you see your GP, tell them about the plant-based health professionals.
I definitely will. I definitely will.
But Giles, I know you said you'd love us to be your GP. I don't want you to come and see me about that mark on your arm. We're very busy at the moment.
I couldn't get through on the phone, Claire.
Oh, no.
I'm joking.
Oh, no. So just shifting slightly to next steps, I suppose. We appreciate that you must have filmed or, recorded a lot of material and had to condense it down to 90 minutes, and the documentary is out there now. But was there footage that you haven't included? Was there going to be, you sort of hinted at follow-ups on YouTube? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
We could probably make a trilogy just from what we've already filmed. It would just be, you really do have so much footage, and it's part of the filmmaking process, as I really learned from Giles in this film, was you just shoot so much and you end up, and it's hard work whittling it down, because it's not like you want to lose it all, but you're going to lose the audience if you don't have something quite coherent that's no more than 90 minutes. You really got to you've got to have a Pacino De Niro standoff scene to justify a couple of hour long film these days, and we didn't have either of them, unfortunately. But it's yes, we could easily create more films, and it's a thing that makes me a little bit sad. In a way, I'm glad, obviously, because as a filmmaker, it gives us plenty to be doing. But as we discussed right at the very beginning, and Giles said, it was important to us to do something meaningful, something that served a cause, that had a higher purpose. And we could make a film every year for the rest of our lives and we wouldn't run out of subject matter. And that's really sad when you think about it. And there's so much we could pick from. And obviously what we'll try and do is pick the low-hanging fruit, in so much as we've been discussing, the probably more by fluke than anything, we happened to make a film about the vegan movement at a time when it's been tipping over from being marginalized to being more accepted. And it is important to try to find those things that are topical at the very least. But of course, you're trying to find something topical and then start filming. It might not be topical in a year or two when the film is done. But there's things that we feel like, are always there and that could always be done. And whether you choose to talk about the cruelty of horse racing or the animals being used in experimentation for science, talking about, medicine and things like that. And whether you talk about other food industries that we could get a lot more buy-in for in places like China, where they farm and eat cats and dogs. It's absolutely unthinkable. But we have to really think about what can we make the biggest difference as quickly as possible by doing. And as I say, it kind of makes me sad that we could spend years formulating a list of all the different subjects that we could cover, which deal with exploitation, cruelty, suffering, you name it. Every continent on the planet, every species is subject to exploitation, even cats and dogs in certain places. Thankfully not here, but it's whatever comes next from us, it's going to be meaningful again. It's going to turn around a lot quicker than this one, because this one did take us an awfully long time. I probably shouldn't say that, because a large part of the delay was the pandemic, and who knows what will happen. But we'd really like to crank things out really fast now, because we've seen that Food for Thought is making a difference and can continue to do that. And it's really important for us to keep doing the same thing for other matters that are really close to our hearts.
Yeah. And as filmmakers, we had to choose who to keep in at times, which was difficult, because someone might have said something fantastic, but someone else said something similar. So we were like, oh, okay, well, who should we choose? But then do we want to come back to them? Because with a documentary, you have to think about the arcs and the characters, who says what, when, why we should use them, why we shouldn't, who it would appeal to, or if it was difficult to understand them. And again, that can happen in a documentary. If we're talking now, if you needed to edit a piece of us into a smaller clip, we might on, you're like, okay, well, we can just tap. But with the documentary, you can't necessarily, it's harder to do that sometimes when you need a coherent sentence. So some people are great and some are not, and we just had to choose. But the amount of stuff on the cutting room floor that we are probably going to start putting out at some point soon as well, and the longer version of the interviews, because in the documentary you see maybe 5 minutes of someone if you're lucky, sometimes 3. We've got hours with these people talking about really important, excellent things that we can go, oh great, well there's even more, with Claire, for instance, that who had cancer diagnosis, or with Roy, he's still alive, he's 92 and he's got no problems at all now, he's still great, he's still really healthy on this planet,
still working,
and he's incredible. So those are the kind of stories that we're like, okay, well there's more there's more story. So yes, it was really difficult to know what to choose, what to put in, but we just kept doing it, didn't we, Dan? We just kept tacking away at it, changing bits. Well, let's bring Roy back in. Okay, well maybe we put Roy here. Well, if we're going to LA at that point, let's move this to here. So we were just doing our filmmaking thing and trying to make it work as a story. And it was sad to see people not make the cut. That's always really disappointing for us, but that's sometimes what you've got to do. It's keep it interesting.
We look forward to watching the additional footage that you'll be releasing. But in the meantime, for our listeners who haven't already seen Food for Thought, it's on YouTube. Is that correct? Free?
Yeah. It is indeed. It's on YouTube, and our channel is Food for Thought Doc, DOC. For documentary, obviously. That's clever, isn't it?
Well, for doctors like you.
We do a lot of food for thought on this podcast.
It does fit for you guys. Food for Thought Doc. You two are both Food for Thought Docs.
Yeah. It's perfect. That's cool.
And, we also have a website, which is foodforthoughtdoc.com. But right now, the place to go is Food for Thought Doc on YouTube, where we're so grateful to already have 12,500 views, and we've only been 4.5 days since release.
Brilliant.
So it's doing well, and lots of people are seeing it, and there's been some lovely feedback, and the more people that can see it, the better, because hopefully it will start to chip away and make a difference.
Fantastic. We'll put all those links in our show notes as well. And yeah, I'm sure our listeners would love it. It's a really excellent documentary. Thank you again for making it. But before you go, we cannot let you go without asking you about your dinner, because yes, we are slightly obsessed with plant-based food on this podcast.
I'm going to go for I love a bolognese. I just like the feel of it, the texture. And that's always something when you do go plant-based is, but I missed the feel or the texture. And now you can get so many options that are exactly that. And usually it's the taste. So for me, I like lentil bolognese, which perfectly works well. Bit of pasta, bit of lentils, tomato puree mixed in with some onions chopped up, and yeah, I just do that. It's nice and simple and quite quick.
Lovely. Like you say, it's always the flavours, isn't it, rather than the actual.
It's always
Yeah.
always the flavors.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I was going to say about that, because that immediately got me thinking about your comment, Dan, about how best to persuade people of the benefits of eating plant-based. And you said, be authentic. And whenever someone mentions bolognese, I always think about the fact that as a GP, I am sometimes inauthentic because I'm trying to do that softly thing. So I'll say something like, oh, you're having bolognese. Why don't you have half lentils? Or why don't you add some walnuts to your beef? And what I really want to say is, don't have the beef, but we're always looking for something that makes us, sound like we're really focusing on the health, but we leave the sort of animal issues to one side. So yeah, it's lovely to hear about a pure lentil bolognese right now.
Can I ask, what is the, because I'd love to know as well, like I for me personally, I'd love that if my GP said, no, literally go out, this is better for you to eat these. I'd be like, fantastic, thank you. Like, for free nutritional advice. Is there a reason you can't sometimes say, oh no, just cut out the meat totally and go lentils? Is it because people will go, or is it something deeper, more internal?
I don't know about you, Claire, but I feel like we've done a lot of extra training. So both me and Claire have done various other courses and nutrition courses and lifestyle medicine. And I feel very confident now that there is enough medical evidence to suggest people stop eating red meat completely. I will say that now in my consultations. I do have the confidence to do that. I didn't, and as you say, the training wasn't quite there. But I think it is changing in medical schools now. I think nutrition is becoming more of a topic that is covered. But I don't know about you, Claire. I'm sort of speaking on behalf of.
No, I completely agree. I don't. Well, I'll give you the caveat, because I agree that all the evidence is there, and I don't feel that I'm going against guidelines by telling people not to eat meat. I think where the problem comes is that part of the skill of being a GP is not upsetting your patient. And as part of that, we're very conscious that we've got to meet people where they're at in terms of our communication with them. So if somebody, is coming at you with all the usual barriers, like my husband, needs meat, he wouldn't have it if I came and said we were going to go vegetarian, then that's when you reach for these compromises, because otherwise you will get a complaint and people will say, that GP didn't actually credit me with all the stuff I had done, and I've done so well, and I've cut down on my alcohol, and I've done this, and now they want me to be a bloody vegetarian as well. And you'll get that sort of comeback, won't you?
100%. Yeah, I can well imagine you'd face resistance, and it's easy for us. Someone resists what we say, it's just like, all right, see you later. Don't watch the film. But if they make a complaint against you, that's a very different consideration for you.
Well, I did. Right when we were promoting the podcast at the beginning, do you remember, Daisy, where I came on and did some, talking head reel about I'm an NHS GP, and I was feeling a bit wobbly at that point about doing that, because that you're going to get interesting comments. And at that point, I think I did get a comment going, isn't this a conflict of interest that someone's promoting this diet? Wow. And of course, it isn't a conflict of interest. But, I've done things like I've written into the local paper, and there's been a whole set of comments about, I've just looked this person up. Is she even a GP? I'm looking at where she works. So there is that kind of, there are people who genuinely believe that you're putting out something that's propaganda, and that you've got your agenda, and we do have an agenda, but it just happens to overlap 100% with the health evidence, and that's a brilliant place to be. But you've still got to, sometimes you've still got to meet those particular patients where they are with their lifestyle.
And I think, like you say, Claire, I think what is really great is that if someone is interested, then actually we have the knowledge and the evidence to show them this is how to do it. And these are, the things to be mindful of when you're looking at swapping over, do you know where you're getting your protein from? Because everyone's worried about protein. Do you know where you're getting your calcium and all that sort of thing? So actually, I think it's helpful when someone is interested, and then we can obviously facilitate that. And I think the podcast is part of that, trying to broaden the message to the wider audience. But sorry, anyway, we've gone off on a tangent.
I love that.
Dan, what about you? Can you tell our listeners what you're having for dinner before?
I can tell them exactly what I'm having for dinner. The moment this podcast ends, I'm going to get in my car and drive to Giles's house and have a lentil bolognese. That sounded really nice.
I'll be up for that, mate. Yeah.
Can we all come over, Giles?
You can. No problem.
I will tonight be having. I love doing this because I can make enough for at least 2, if not 3 meals, and it's just so easy and quick. Rice, cashew nuts, tofu, Oggs, which is the vegan eggs.
Oh yeah.
Peas, corn, mushrooms, onion. So it's this huge sort of very high protein fried rice, if you like. It's like an egg fried rice, vegan egg fried rice with lots of protein. And next to that, because of the fact that I'm training a lot at the moment, I'm going to be having broccoli, cauliflower, and I get it nice and I boil it a little bit and then I chuck it in a frying pan and I cover it in cheese, vegan cheese. So it's cheesy broccoli, cauliflower side dish, and it's absolutely delicious. And I load everything up with chili, so it's nice and spicy as well.
Mate,
Wow.
I've changed my mind. I'm going to drive to yours.
Yeah, we're all coming to Dan's instead.
That sounds fantastic.
Brilliant.
I like the sound of doing some training, Dan. That sounds like a good regimen.
Well, you know what? It's interesting when we're talking about how, Daisy, your question about how do we shift things to make a bigger impact on people. I've always gone to the gym and thrown weights around my whole life, and never seriously, but just to stay fit and healthy and try and stay in shape. And about a year and a half ago, I suddenly got into open water swimming, and that led to me loving the sort of endurance side of things, which led to me getting into triathlon, which led to me doing my first ever triathlon last April, and then 3 more last year. And I'd obviously raised money for animal charities for each one of them. And I'm now hooked on triathlon, which I think is really, really healthy, probably especially for my age. It's probably much more healthy for me than throwing weights around. But the point of it is that same message we talked about earlier, where you subtly live from that place that's, I'm not telling anyone what to do, but if anyone sees me and thinks, oh, yeah, he's a bit of a weak little vegan, isn't he? I will welcome them to try a triathlon. And I don't think they will think that. I think a lot of people, if anything, would probably think, I thought he's doing triathlon. I thought he was vegan. Yeah. And it's just sending that message out because Game Changers does that beautifully, doesn't it? In terms of saying Lewis Hamilton, Novak Djokovic, the world's strongest man, the Olympians they cover with this in the cycling team, all of whom are vegan and not just surviving, but thriving and winning at elite levels. Not that I'm categorizing myself along with them, but what I mean is that if people see you living from a place where you're just really healthy and you're off doing training every day, you can only send a positive message, but you're doing it, it's a stealth marketing message, isn't it? You're not
absolutely. Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, there's so many excellent vegan athletes, aren't there? I was listening to Rich Roll today. Did you know that he did, on a plant-based diet, an Ironman on 5 consecutive days?
There you go.
There you go. Unbelievable.
Well, it's staggering. And as you'll remember in the film, our trail runners who do 50 kilometer to 200 mile mountain races, as they discussed, not only are they vegan, but most of their fellow athletes are vegan, because in that kind of endurance sport, it's no myth. Everyone knows the best way to heal, the best way to recover faster, the best way to avoid inflammation is a whole foods plant-based diet. So they're all eating it because they want to win. And you can't make that up. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there you literally have in Game Changers the world's strongest man who's vegan. So it's kind of inarguable, but people do argue it, as we know.
Well, keep chipping away. So for purposes of time, we probably won't bore you with what we're having for dinner. But thank you so much for your contributions and for coming on our podcast. We really appreciate your time. And it was really lovely to speak with you. Thank you once again.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having us. We love the work you're doing as well. Thank you. And we'll cross paths again in the future, I hope.
Yeah, totally agree.
We might even be in your next documentary, don't you think? Because after you cut us out of this one, I was so disappointed that you didn't use that footage.
Oh my God, people think we did now. No, I would love you to be in the next one.
I was not 100%.
in it. Cut room floor, both of you. No, but 100%. Yeah, we'd love that. We'd love that. Yes. Can't
For
you
real,
now?
that's a real thing.
That's
actually.
a real thing.
That's
Yeah. We've even
No
got
pressure.
we've even got a
No.
title, haven't we? Second thoughts. So
on second thoughts. Yeah.
Nice.
That's a good title,
food for
right?
thought, and 2
Brilliant.
second thoughts. There we go. Yeah.
Unless people go on second thoughts, I don't think I'll watch that.